Thank you very much. Actually, I wanted to start exactly with this joke that if your name is Florian, then obviously you have to do something with the Rust. Do you have some control over the slides? Okay, thank you. So let's start with some words about me. I'm with Electrobit for almost 2 decades now. I started as a C++ programmer, and one of my first tasks was to port our old navigation system that we had back then from Windows to QNX. It was kind of half running on Linux already. Yeah, but my job was to get it running on QNX. And this is something which followed me my whole career because we are using QNX very often in many projects. And yeah, so I had to ensure that our code works on QNX basically all the time. I have no experience or had no experience with compilers. How are they implemented internally? Same for standard library. This is maybe interesting for something I'm going to say later. And I was quite a C++ fanboy. I am guilty of making stupid, unnecessary jokes about people who did not use C++, like Java developers. It was unnecessary. I'm sorry for that. And what might be interested, I was never interested in Rust. I was aware that Mozilla had this kind of side project for their Firefox browser, but to me it was always a thing, yeah, there is just one company behind it. If they decide to drop this project, it would just be gone. So I was never really interested in the language. Yeah, and then February 2021, I think I have read this announcement on the 9th of February. So this is the exact date when I became interested in Rust. The Rust Foundation was now created by several big companies. So in addition to Mozilla, also Google, Amazon, /AWS, Hawaii, Microsoft have been behind this language. And this made me curious. Why are so huge companies behind this language? There has to be more about this than just the Firefox browser. So I started to read a little bit about it, and I was getting excited more and more every day, the more I read about it, that things that you have to do daily, like documenting your code, compiling your code, running the code, things like coding guidelines, how do I indent my code or indent, where do I put the opening braces? These are things that kept us busy at Electrobit from time to time. There have been a lot of discussions. We have spent a lot of time with tools like CMake. And Rust seems to be very, very interesting and making things easier. So I started to talk to some managers, whether it would make sense to give it a try. Yeah, but then there is this thing about QNX support that we didn't have. And that was kind of a blocker. Yeah, so I needed some weeks to think about this issue. And then at one point I thought, hey, maybe it's not the compiler who has to support an operating system. Maybe it's actually the standard library. Let's give it a try to build something without standard library. And just give it a try. And I had some commands which are maybe similar to that. They are certainly not exactly these, but I somehow got some something very small running. It's not really an Hello World application, because for Hello World I would need the standard library to print out text. But I could do some simple calculations there, and just to see, okay, basically it seems to be running. Maybe I'm on a good path there. So let's continue with that. And yeah, then I took the Linux version of the standard library. I have built everything for Linux and tried to link it and get it running on QNX, which I know today quite nonsense, which couldn't work. You see this long list of linker issues, and so this was already in October 2021, where I finally asked at Stack Overflow, hey, does someone know about this? Is there, how do I fix that? Yeah, but it seems to be quite complicated. I also didn't know back then how to contact the Rust community, which is why I've used Stack Overflow. And this was then some time to get back to my actual project, do other things, let it be for some time until spring 2022, when I finally got some free time, and some managers granted me 10 days, 10 working days, 2 weeks to work on that. So I massaged the standard library and still compiling actually for Linux and trying to somehow get it work on QNX. And finally, I think not on the 10th day, but on the 8th in the afternoon, I got something running. Happy, excited. I could do things like Hello World. I could work a little bit with containers, but somehow it still was not working correctly. For example, you could see that I'm trying to create a file there, and this only worked when the file already existed. I could override it, but if I deleted the file, then this just wouldn't work. And on the next day, I learned, hey, the standard library is using a crate called Eclipse, which defines some magic values, like shown here below. Maybe the developers of you have seen this before. If you ask an operating system to open a file, you have to provide some flags like this O_create. And QNX and Linux have a different understanding about the value there, which is the reason why it wasn't working. But yet, it was successful enough to buy me another 2 weeks to work on that and then smoothing out rough edges. I learned that there is a great test suite provided by the Rust language. Also for the Eclipse crate, there are a lot of automatic tests, which helped a lot to get things running. So after, yeah, I think 2 or 3 additional iterations, it was working very fine. And we started to think about open sourcing these changes. So far, they have been just some internal fork. But we thought, yeah, maybe it makes sense to open source our changes. And we got in contact with BlackBerry, and unfortunately we got some support from them, worked together. And then end of 2022, we finally created our pull request to the Rust project. We had this great press release together with BlackBerry. Soon after that, I think in March 2023, it got finally be part of the official Rust toolchain. So now if you want to build for QNX, it's part of the official toolchain. And what I have learned along this path is that the standard library is actually supporting a lot of different operating systems, like, I don't know, 20 or something. And adding another one is quite simple. This is something we can do quite easily. I got some feeling that when the stuff that I'm building compiles, that often it seems to just work. This was something I did not expect. But it was an observation, hence the 4 question marks. And open sourcing the changes was simple, it was fun. And in the midterm, I have learned that it was very good for the quality. And it reduced our efforts significantly. We have saved a lot of money by open sourcing those changes. We now have kind of a community which cares about QNX support. Also, 2 people from Faro Systems joined the effort of providing QNX support to Rust, thanks to Florian. But we also have other people who care about different third-party libraries and adding QNX support to that. So I really can recommend doing the same. Yeah, but how can I convince a customer that now that I have a tool chain to allow me to use this code while I just have some simple test applications? Would you give me money to implement something huge and all the trust that I can give you is some simple test applications? I don't think so. So we needed something bigger. I've been in the lucky situation that one of my colleagues who has a lot of experience in implementing cluster instruments with very different frameworks from Kanzi to EB Guide and several HTML frameworks. He had some free time between 2 projects, roughly 6 weeks, and he already had 2 weeks of Rust experience. Basically, it was 1 week of reading the book and another one gaining some practical experience with small Rust quizzles. And he was excited to learn something new. To make it not this easy, I selected a framework no one at Electrobit has heard before, which is the Bevy framework. But there are nice YouTube tutorials. So I told him, hey, Norman, watch these tutorials. Good luck. I'm going on vacation now. What we also provided to him have been some mock-ups about the HMI so that he has some idea how the result should look like, assets like PNG files, so that he could really concentrate on the HMI. Yeah, and then after 6 weeks, this is what he has accomplished. He told me that with the other tools that he has worked before, where he had much more experience, he would not have been faster. He would need roughly the same time, which is very interesting in my opinion, and speaks for the language and also the Bevy framework. What you can also see there is this Edge browser window. It took me like 1 hour to get it running on a browser. And this is insane. I mean, we had some software which was running on Windows, and getting it running in a browser in a very performant way was a matter of 1 hour. So that's really crazy. And yeah, then it was not yet running on QNX, but getting it running on QNX was, yeah, something like an hour. We have this hardware which I brought with me, where you can connect up to 12 displays, and the only thing that we needed to implement is basically telling QNX where to render, on which display should it appear. And yeah, this was very surprising to me. The Bevy framework has something like 2 million lines of code, and getting it running on QNX was basically no work at all. We needed to implement a little bit of code to tell it on which display do we want to render on, and that's it. And it just worked. It did not crash. And this kind of portability was something I have never experienced before in those 1.5 decades where I was working on different operating systems. So that was very, very interesting to me. One coding thing, for at least some of you might be interesting, which is very baby specific, but I wanted to show it just to give you some idea how Rust can make things easier. We have this function startup calculate values. It's not important what it does exactly. It gets 4 parameters on the left, and all I'm doing is telling, hey baby, please run this function whenever you are rendering a new frame. I'm not telling it how to do that. I can specify arbitrary parameters there. I can add, for example, this parameter on any position. I could also shuffle around all the parameters. It will just work. And Bevy does not know this function, or at least the framework itself. This is something I can define as a user. I define what data do I need, and Bevy takes care about everything else. This is very nice to implement features, to modify features. If I just need more data, then I just specify it there, and everything else is done automatically. And maybe you have heard about the borrow checker issues in Rust, which are often said as one of the reasons why it is hard to learn Rust. We almost never had such issues. And maybe with this concept where you have kind of global variables and you just specify what data you want to have, where the state is stored, you just get it. And that's all. So that's very, very interesting from a technical point of view. Okay. So in my opinion and experience, learning Rust is not as hard as many people say. Norman had 2 weeks of experience and could implement new features. We extended the demo also for the embedded world, which you can see here, and tomorrow I will show it again. There I took another colleague with 0 Rust experience and told her, okay, here 2 or 3 videos about Rust, a few videos about Bevy, and within 1 week, including learning, she has been able to implement some small feature there. So it's not so hard as long as you don't try to write perfect code. If you try to minimize CPU load, for example, to the optimum, or RAM usage and so on, if you try to minimize boilerplate code, for example, then things get complicated. And mastering Rust is, in my opinion, very, very hard. It takes a long time. But implementing simple things is simple in Rust. And usually, when it compiles, it just works. Yeah, portability is, in my opinion, absolutely crazy. This is something I've never experienced with any other language before. One thing I really want to emphasize is Rust is not perfect. You cannot walk on water just because you are programming in Rust. And especially the people like me who really love the language and see a lot of benefits in it, and there are a lot of benefits. It's important for us to say that it is not perfect. There are some small rough edges. It is going to improve over time, which is in itself another issue because the language evolves very quickly and you need to keep on learning. But in general, it helps a lot. It saves you so much time, so much trouble. I've experienced so much overtime and working on Saturdays because of crashes. These are things that you usually don't have in Rust at all, and this is where it really shines. And also, open sourcing things is very fun. please do that. It's good for your quality. It's good for your money to do that. If you have some private forks with private changes, go ahead, open source them. It's really worth it. Okay, we have some time for questions. The last slide is not so interesting, so I would go back to this. At least I would try to go back to the animation. Ah, there it is. So time for questions if you have some. Yes, please. Pardon? We have a customer project where we have a cluster instrument, a little bit like this, without Bevy, but written in Rust, which is going into serial production. And this demo helped to get this project.